Welcome to NSS Connections, a series of monthly virtual programs for sculptors. My name is Gwen Peer, and I'm here in New York City in the NSS offices with our president, Michelle Longley. Our program today is a tour of Crown Arts Studio in Norman, Oklahoma, with NSS fellow Paul Moore and his son, Todd Moore. We could easily spend an hour introducing Paul and his many accomplishments. I urge you to visit his website and the internet for more information after the program. Michelle, I am now passing the microphone to you.
I will try to be brief, introducing our NSS fellow Paul Moore, which is going to be quite difficult when you have an artist with so much talent. Among his over 150 commissions and projects, one stands out. In 2019, Paul completed the 1889 Centennial Land Run Monument in Oklahoma City. It is one of the most monumental sculpture installations, both in size and historical context. I hope you all read the wonderful chapter dedicated to it by Gordon Alt in the last winter issue of Sculptor Review magazine. Paul's work is included in major collections and museums like the US Capitol in Washington, Broad Green Gardens in South Carolina, and the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. After winning every top award, Paul just recently was nominated to receive the Medal of Honor by the National Sculptor Society, the highest award for his many outstanding public works, for inspiring the next generation of artists, and for never compromising when it comes to excellence in sculpture. Paul, congratulations again, and thanks to you and your son Todd for welcoming us in your studio. We are going to see magic, but I know it's not magic. It's hard work and lots of talent. Paul, we're ready for you to open the door.
Hi, for those that don't know me, I'm Paul Moore. Welcome to the studio. We have a 5,000 square foot studio in the old part of Norman, Oklahoma. Anyway, the room that we're starting out in is what I call a gallery. It's a place where we put in our sculptures in between being shipped off to different shows. It also has a lot of my collection in it, which I collect a lot of Native American pieces and also pieces on American sculptors. I've been very fortunate to run across multiple pieces. Let me just sort of give you a rundown on some of the pieces that I have in my collection, which I'm really excited about. I come in here for inspiration constantly. I was very fortunate to run into a gentleman who is the son of the enlarger for James and Laura Fraser. And his family, since the Frasers didn't have kids, his family was given everything to the family that wasn't taken by Syracuse or by the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. Just recently, they purchased over 60 plasters, original plasters of James and Laura Fraser's, and I was able to get several of their pieces in the meantime. One thing that we were able to purchase was their enlarging machine, which we're going to hopefully restore this coming year. Anyway, unfortunately, I don't have that in my studio right now. We have to clear out our larger working studio to make that happen. But Todd's going to try to keep up with me on this. And anyway, one of the things that I really love is a sculpting stand here of James and Laura's. And it's what's really interesting on it is has the Edel brand here. Which has been turned into Sculpture House. But anyway, I've got two of their sculpting stands. This is one of them and another small one over on the side over here. A lot of my collection, if Todd, let's head down and look at the stuff for the American sculpture over here. So if you look on this far corner here is the actual original plaster of the top of President Taft Memorial that was done for Arlington Cemetery. Only 2 presidents were buried there in Arlington. One Taft was Kennedy. And so anyway, got that as well as the maquette, the original maquette for it, and his original sketch that he did for the monument's top. If you notice, it's round instead of more ornate like the final one. And for those in New York City, go to the Metropolitan Museum of Fine Arts and go into their Greek section, and you'll see the inspirations on both of these. One of them looks like his original sketch, and they wanted something more ornate, and so he did the one next to it that is more ornate, which you can see in the corner here on what he finally ended up doing. What's also interesting, most people aren't interested in this, but sculptors are, is that I got the original calculations in the frame there also for all the calibrating of the piece. And then over here we have a piece that Laura did when she was a student and before she married James, and another one of her figures over right next to it. This piece down here, the pan head, was done by James, and Herbert Adams did the Lincoln head, and Daniel Chester French, some of the very first pieces that he did was the owls, the owls that are rubbing up against one another. That was his very first piece. And then the second and third piece were the companion pieces down here of the 2 dogs. And I was able to find those in antique stores. In one antique store, they said that the eagle here that I have, the Bozzetto of the eagle, was James Fraser's, but it is actually Daniel Chester French. And so you could tell French sprayed a lot of his Bozzettos and small pieces gold in his early years. And this is a architectural element in his standing Lincoln that he did, the side elements. Also, Laura, if you go to the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, they have a 12-foot version of her land run. And the sculpture, this part here, the piece was supposed to be enlarged to 50 foot for the state of Oklahoma's 50th anniversary. And of course, the state backed out on it. But this was her concept of the granite backing that would hold the 50-foot piece if it was completed. Also inside here, I have a calling card from Daniel Chester French and a tobacco card from Bartholdi, who did the Statue of Liberty, and a dio, what is it called, Todd? It's where they have the double figures and put in the slot. I forgot the name of it now. But anyway, that's Joe Davidson's hands there working on his portrait of Gandhi. And anyway, speaking of Joe Davidson, I have the head of the FDR down here also, and other pieces from various different artists. Anyway, from that, I've collected other pieces like John Flanagan's medallion that was done for the sculptors in New York when they had a grand opening of a foundry, and they cast those up for all the sculptors that attended. And is a portrait that Flanagan did of St. Gaudens. Of course, James Earl Fraser, Flanagan, McMonnies, Femster Proctor. I mean, he had an incredible crew of people that worked for him. And, all of them became great artists. Here's a little Bozzetto of Laura Fraser's piece that of General Lee and Stonewall Jackson, with a photo of her working on it. And unfortunately, that was taken down this last year. If you've ever been into Oklahoma, there's a place called Ponca City, and they did the Pioneer Woman by Brian Baker was done, and there's a large competition that was done. If you ever come here, They have now collected all of them that's in the collection of the Marlin Mansion there in Ponca City. But this is a signed photo that Brian Baker did of the Pioneer Woman. What's fun is on the back, it has a stamp on there, Pioneer Woman statue, Ponca City, Oklahoma, gift of E.W. Marlin, and also Brian Baker's stamp on the back. Anyway, I've just been collecting things like that. You know, silver print that was taken in 1915 of the End of the Trail by James Earl Fraser. Some of his clay that went from James to Pompeo Capini to Larry Ludke to myself. And James Fraser's transfer machine that you go from plaster to stone, as well as a tool that's stamped with his name in it. Anyway, I've collected a lot of pieces, not only of his, but also some like Donald DeLue's sketch of a commission that he did for a cathedral of a large crucifix piece. Even have a casting of Abraham Lincoln's hand that was done by Leonard Volk. And it's amazing just how big his hand was. You know, I have big hands, but Abraham Lincoln had monstrous hands. But anyway, what started all this off for me was when I was a kid. You know, I'd never been to a museum or to an artist studio. I was born in Oklahoma, grew up most of my life between Oklahoma and California. And, you know, my great grandmother was a painter. And I grew up on stories of, I'm a fifth generation Oklahoman. So my great grandmother came across on the Trail of Tears into Oklahoma. She was a Muskogee Creek Indian. And my paternal grandfather grew up next door to Quanah Parker. And Quanah Parker's youngest wife, Tunaisi, Quanah Parker was a great Comanche chief. Anyone that's in the West knows his name. But his youngest wife, Tunaisi, made my grandfather's baby moccasins for him. And Quanah gave him a bear claw necklace that I fortunately have in my collection. And those were the great inspirations that led me into the whole world that I'm in today. That and a visit to the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. Back then it was called the Cowboy Hall of Fame. And they had James and Laura Fraser's pieces, their whole studio in a certain building there. Unfortunately, it's been removed and put in storage. A few of their pieces are setting out. Actually, more of them are coming out now since they purchased those 60 plasters. I hope one day that they'll actually go in and put the studio back together and you know, and have a lot of the incredible pieces, such as the Special Medal of Honor that Laura did. The original plasters are in the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum's collection. So anyway, I've collected pieces over the years, everything from friends of mine like Chuck Jones was a dear friend of mine. I did a portrait of him for the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. He was one of the great animators, worked for Warner Brothers, was one of the top 5 animators in animation history. And Chuck and I became very good friends while doing his portrait. And he'd send me sketches and drawings and lithographs and, you know, wonderful letters that I collected and put on my walls. Anyway, but I've been just you know, totally excited about being part of doing Western art. A lot of people consider it an inferior art form, but I don't. I actually taught myself how to sculpt off of all the great American sculptors. I would find as many books as I could. Since we didn't have the internet back then, you know, you had to go and find books. So I was able to build up a pretty good collection of rare books on American sculptors. And I would study their work, study their lives, push myself to understand their philosophies. Some of the things that still affect me today are the philosophies of various different sculptors. One in particular was a French sculptor, Rodin. One thing that I use every day was a comment that he made. He said that a sculpture is made up of 1,000 silhouettes. And at first I didn't understand it, but then more I studied about his life, you know, he was very nearsighted. So he would work at night in his studio and walk around the sculpture with a candle so he could actually see the silhouettes much cleaner. And if you do that, you can see the negative and positive form colliding with one another. And if you've made a mistake, you can actually see your mistakes if you focus just on the silhouettes. So that's one of the biggest impacts in my life as a sculptor, is studying that. Anyway, most of the pieces that I like to do, I lived in Santa Fe for about 13 years and got to know a lot of the Pueblo people around the area. And so I fell in love with their ceremonies and their religious beliefs. And so I try to honor them in telling those stories. Most people think of Native Americans as just Plains Indians with the bonnets and the buckskins. But there's I don't know how many hundreds of tribes that there are in America, but each one is different, and their religious beliefs and ceremonies are totally different. So what I try to do is honor each of those tribes that I can, and try to show that there's such a wide variety of Native Americans that exist. Anyway, let's walk over here, Todd. Over here is this is a maquette that I did back in, the 1990s for a piece for the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center. And they had a fairly tight budget. So I had to come up with a cattle drive on $1 million, and they wanted a whole herd, but there's no way you can do that. So I stole from Augustus St. Gaudens' concept of his Shaw Memorial and went from a low to a high relief with three-dimensional figures in front. And so this piece is done life-size at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center in Duncan, Oklahoma. Also, speaking of the Frasers, in one store I found James designed the Navy Cross, and I was able to get an original plaster of his Navy Cross along with a mold that made the ship relief in the front of it. And I kept the price tags on because I really lucked out on that one. This one cost $5 and that was 15. So I really feel blessed to be able to find a lot of these pieces. In here we have a lot of Laura's and James pieces, and this is the Bozzetto for his Audubon piece. It was 9 foot tall. Anyway, currently I'm working on, I'm trying to break away from doing a lot of the bronze work. During the pandemic, I had, a lot of the foundries, I'm sure all of you experienced this, a lot of the foundries had closed down at different times, and we had obligations to be into certain shows. So for the Prix de West show at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Center or museum, I had to have 2 more pieces for their show. So I started looking around, and I did a stone piece, which was the first stone piece that I did, but I had a stone sitting in my studio. I'd promised myself if I ever found the time, I would do it. The other thing that I did was I made an altar piece, an altar to the buffalo out of wood and polymer, which has really launched me into so many different directions. I'm now, for the show this year, 3 out of the 5 pieces that I put into the show are of the altar pieces that I'm working with now. This is another one that I finished that I'm excited about, and I think it came out extremely well. The other ones are based on ones on plains called The Origins of the Sundance, and telling the story of the Sundance in the altar, and then the other 2 are based on the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. So anyway, let me take you into the main studio where we work. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot going on in here. Off a couple commissions, and we're working on a small one of a life-size piece for Ada, Oklahoma. And I did some pieces for the Thunder basketball team, which was being used to entice Grant and stay, but it didn't work. So anyway, it's sort of a dead project. I'll be cutting these up here soon. And as you can see, the studios, we tried to clean as much as we could, but it was pretty messy. We were still trying to reclaim some clay from the land run project. It took us 20 years to do. And it really was a 45 life and a half elements that spanned over 300 feet. And the piece over here is my oldest son's very first commission piece that we'll be cutting up here soon. But we just haven't had time with all the commissions going on. This is of a famous chef here, an Italian chef in Krebs, Oklahoma, that started a famous restaurant in Oklahoma called Pete's Place. And the bronze sits out in front of their restaurant. So anyway, down here, we have a couple of the pieces left over from the land run. These are the last two pieces that we still have to cut up and reclaim the clay. This was our last piece that went in, and it's of my oldest grandson and granddaughter. We saved the pieces right next to the wagon that their parents are in. They're riding alongside of it. And the day that we installed the wagon with their parents on it, my daughter-in-law went into labor and had our grandson. And 14 years later, we finished up the project from the time the wagon went in. And our grandson's 14 here, at 6 foot, and his sister's on back, holding on to him, screaming while they're riding through the chaos of the land run. So we thought we'd make it interesting and try to toss something in that after you do 44 pieces, you get a little bored with it. So the 45th piece was fun for us to do, and to push the pieces through like that worked out well. I'm currently working on several projects for Ada, Oklahoma. The one with the naming of the town of Ada was a little girl that you saw previously. And here's another one of Jim Thorpe, the great athlete he's still considered one of the greatest athlete of all times in America. And this was when he was in Carlisle Indian School playing football. And I put on the rain slicker because, we look at him as Superman. So I thought it'd be appropriate to stick on the slicker and to, have Carlisle on the back. And anyway, I hope it all goes through so we can do it to a 9-foot figure. Other than that, I've really been trying to just push myself as an artist each time, and I'm trying to challenge myself with every piece that I do now. I'm trying to slow down on the commissions. Hopefully, within a couple of years, I'll be able to get away from doing commission work altogether and just focus on doing some painting as well as sculpting. My next piece is actually going to be a combination of a painting and sculpture, and I'm looking forward to doing it and see if it'll work out. Anyway, it's after you sit and talk about yourself, it gets a little boring. But Gwen, do you have any questions from anyone that?
Yeah, Larry Bechtel is asking how you reclaim the clay, especially from so many pieces. Do you just scrape it off the foam, or do you have another method?
We put through tons of clay while doing the land run project, and we'll be on the thick areas, we'll cut the clay off. Thin areas, we'll just chuck the foam and what's left of the clay. We already have, I think, 12 barrels of clay, so we're gonna try to just reclaim what we have. We'll probably chuck a lot of it because we have enough clay. I don't think we'll ever use that amount of clay again. Anyway, we'll cut it off and clean it and then put it in the barrels. It's a tedious job, boring job. It's hard to get anyone to volunteer to come in and help me out. I did have one student show up on Friday for the morning, and she didn't come back for the afternoon. So anyway, I'm hoping that she'll come back again and continue to help me, because she's the only one that wants to to help out. She's an incredible young artist that's a wildlife artist. Anyway, do you have another one?
Yeah, just as a follow-up, Wesley is asking how you warm up your clay.
I just use heat lamps. Todd can show you. You know, I had clay warmers and everything, but we just developed these little systems here that we can run the lights up, and within minutes I can have warm clay going. And I just find it so much easier to do that. And then if I need to do a demo somewhere, I just unclip the light and fold up the top and take it to wherever I'm at. So it works out well. It's very simple and easy. I tried clay warmers and they're fine, but you know, when you have to set them on timers and everything, and after a while, they'll start up and start heating the clay a little too much, and then you have the smell of clay, you know, wafting through the area. And this other way is just nice and quick and easy for me. It's about as simple as can be, but I find it works for me better than anything.
And Paul, Maria is asking what type of clay you use.
I'm using the classic clay, medium. I find that it holds its firmness. We can cut the parts off without distortion. I like using the dark brown clay because it helps me with the value tones, especially when I'm doing pieces for public art, outdoor pieces. You can see your value tones a little better, a little cleaner. When you use the tan, at least for me, I cannot see, you know, how harsh the light's going to hit on them. So the dark brown clay works the best for me.
Thank you. And Amy Kahn is asking, when you reference painting, are you saying that you'll be doing paintings on canvas or painting your sculpture?
This next one I'm going to be doing is going to be on canvas. And sometimes we do it on board. We'll use a maple plywood and gesso it, rough it, gesso it, sand it, gesso it again, you know, 3 times. And then we go in with the oil paint on top of that. But the one that I'm talking about, referring to, is going to be done on canvas. And I'm going to be combining, it's hard to describe. I haven't seen anyone do it before. So you'll just have to wait and see what comes up. I'm doing it for next year's Prix de West show.
And Paul, since we're right there, can you talk a little bit about the piece of Ada and the naming, et cetera?
Yeah, and this the town of Ada. It's a town that's the headquarters for the Chickasaw Nation here in Oklahoma, and a physician there, Dr. John Garber, requested to have this done. Right after the land run, a man named William Reed ended up building a mercantile store there in this community. And, you know, there was no post office there at the time. So everyone asked him to try to get together with the U.S. Postal Service and get get some kind of postal service delivery to his store, since it's sort of in the center of the community. So he wrote them, was able to get a response after, you know, weeks or if not months. And they said that he had to come up with a town name, even though a town hadn't been developed at that point. And so he wrote down Rush Springs and sent it back, and they said that has already been taken. So they said, give us another name, and he put down Reed Mercantile, and they said, you can't name it after your store. So when he received that letter and that rejection, they said, send us another name. And he looked across the store, and his youngest daughter, Ada, was there. And so he just wrote down the name Ada and sent it to them, and they accepted that. So that's how the town got its name. So the sculpture of Ada here is going to have her holding the first letter coming into the community, which is going to be addressed to her father at Reed Mercantile at Ada Indian Territory, because it was before the state became statehood, was in 1907, I believe. And this took place in, I believe it was 1890. Anyway, and then I put the teddy bear in there because Teddy Roosevelt was the president at the time, and is right at the time that he refused to shoot a bear cub that was tied to a tree at a hunting party that he went to. And so he released the bear cub, and the story got out. And so they created the teddy bear named after Teddy Roosevelt. So anyway, I thought I'd put that in. Not only does it show her being a child, but also in reference to Teddy Roosevelt.
That's great. And we have a technical question from Nancy Brenner. What type of lighting do you choose to use when you're sculpting?
Well, we try to use mostly natural, but we are indirect also. We just have some, what are these called, Todd, around here? Halogen lights that are bouncing off the ceiling. We have a white tin ceiling in here, and we just reflect it off the top and down. And then we have some photo lights that if we need to, we can move them around. If we have a dark area, we can light it up. But it's mostly natural lighting coming from the front of the building to the indirect lighting bouncing off of the ceiling. And I prefer it that way because you don't have the harsh shadows coming down and distortions when you have the indirect lighting bouncing off the ceiling. And then the photo lights, we have filters on the front, so they filter everything out.
Paul, would you mind sharing the two recent pieces that are memorialized the revolt of 1680 that you alluded to earlier?
Yeah, Todd, let me see the phone there. I have some photos on my phone. I don't know if you guys can see them, but I'll show them to you. But the 1680 revolt is actually the only Native American revolt against colonialism that was successful in America. And what happened is that the Spanish came into what is now known as New Mexico, and was with the Spanish and the Catholic Church were so harsh on the indigenous population that they didn't want them to practice their religious beliefs. They were afraid that they would lose their identity. So a man named Pope, he was a holy man of the Pueblos. He sent out knotted ropes to all of the Pueblos, and he told them that take one knot off each day, and then when they hit the last knot, undo it and then attack and kill as many Spanish and as many of the priests as you can. And then that way the Spanish couldn't, since they're being attacked everywhere, they couldn't go in and try to group together to fight off the attack. So they drove the Spanish out of the New Mexico area down to the El Paso area for 11 years. And when the Spanish came back, they had to do a much lighter approach to the indigenous people. And even the Catholic Church had to combine in the natural beliefs of the Native American people into Catholicism at the Pueblos, and allow them to do everything they wanted to do to keep their culture going. One of the pieces is called the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, which has, Todd, tell me when I'm there. But this one here is with, it's of a Catholic priest that has been bound up and shot with arrows, sort of like a Saint Sebastian type of approach. The altar is made out of wood and tin, and we put the lighting in just for the dramatic effect. The halo is has all the names of the Pueblos that took place in the Pueblo Revolt in a decoration circling the halo. So anyway, that's one of the pieces, and it's a life-size upper torso of a figure. We did that in polymer and then painted it a lot like the the Spanish Renaissance or Baroque, I guess, Spanish Baroque period. The other one is called Santa Fe, the blending of the cultures, which is showing when they came back into New Mexico, they had to do a much lighter approach, and they blended the natural elements of the Pueblo people, such as the moon which is behind him that looks like, and the mud that and earth that is put on his arms and belly for the ceremonial dances. And I made the altarpiece, which represents the Catholic Church in the Spanish, wrapping around, and it's still a little confining. You know, even though they came in with a light approach, it was still a little confining for them. But because they came in with a lighter approach, it took on a 400 years of peace with the cultures living together. So anyway, those are the two pieces. The other one, which is inspiring us to go into other directions, into some 2D work. It's one that's called The Origins of the Sundance. Most people have heard of the Sundance, but they don't know anything about the story behind the Sundance and why it took place. And so doing the research with the Blackfeet tribe, it's of the, am I there, Todd? It's of the main woman, the portrait of the woman there. She's called the Turnip Woman. She's a holy woman of the Blackfeet. And it's a story of Feather Woman. And I tried through the relief on the top, as well as the side panels. You can see them there that we did in gold. Tells the story of Feather Woman, how she fell in love with a morning star, and morning star took on a human form and then came down to earth and married her, and they had a child called Skyboy. And anyway, he took her up to Sky Country. No, his name's Starboy. I'm sorry. He took her up to Sky Country to meet his parents, who was the sun and the moon. And while up there, they said, you can live up here as long as you want. Don't touch the sacred turnip. Sort of like a Eve in the Garden of Eden type of an approach. And so anyway, she, after a while, it drove her nuts trying to figure out why she couldn't touch the sacred turnip. So 2 cranes landed, which is in a relief there. And they landed and helped her pull up the sacred turnip. And when they did, there was a hole through the clouds down to her village below. And she put it back in place, but the son knew that she disobeyed him, and he kicked her out of heaven. Matter of fact, the final image on the other side is of a man who webbed down to earth, so she and could climb down to earth to live with her parents. But he cured illness, sickness, and death, which they never experienced before. When she got down to earth, her husband wouldn't talk to her anymore, and so she died of a broken heart, seeing all of the devastation that her disobedience caused. So her son, after she died of a broken heart, and her son, he lived with his earthly parents until they died, and he fell in love with a beautiful woman. She wouldn't marry him because he was born with a birth defect on his face. So to get this scar removed. And she said, you have to go up to Sky Country and talk to your grandfather. The son's the only one that can remove it. So he climbed the Milky Way, got up there, and he said, I'll remove the scar, but you got to promise me something. Since your mother's disobedience, I had to curse the earth with illness and death. And so I'm going to teach you a dance and a ceremony that when you get to earth, you got to go around the plains and teach all the tribes how to do it to try to save as many people as you can. So he taught him the dance. He removed the scar. He went down to earth and went around and fulfilled his destiny of teaching them the sun dance. So that's what that one's about. So
Paul, I'm getting a message.
Anyway, long story.
Sorry that your bandwidth is low, but I can still hear you okay. And my apologies. I missed one question from Danella Lay, and she's asking whether you could share the stone piece, your first stone carving.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to go in the other room. Anyway, I had some steatite left over, and when I always told myself one day when I had the time, I would do it. And I'll turn it this way so you don't have the light behind you. Anyway, I did a piece called Window Rock Madonna, and Window Rock is the main area for the Navajo Nation. And anyway, I went in and carved that out. I had 2 weeks before the show, so I, played with some stone. And for my first piece, I think it came out pretty good. So anyway, I don't even know how long we've been going on this, but
we've got a few more minutes. Another question from Susie Chisholm. How many people do you have working in your studio?
One. I have Todd. Yeah. So my oldest son and I, Todd just waved. My oldest son, he broke away and he's doing his own mold making company. But Todd and I are the only ones here. At one time, I think we had 4 or 5 people working here. Maybe, 5 people, I think, at one time. And I was helping out a friend who had a daughter that wanted to learn a lot about sculpting, but we only had 4 at the time. So that was the most we ever had in here. But anyway, we're pretty efficient on pushing things through fairly fast, and I'm a fairly quick sculptor.
And another question from Danella. Excuse me for interrupting, but
no problem.
Before you moved to this massive 5,000 square foot studio, where were you working, or what was your original studio like?
Well, my first original studio actually was in Santa Fe. I had one thing I did was I worked early in my career. I worked in foundries to learn my craft. So I had moved up to Montana for a while, and I worked at the Ace Pal foundry, which closed a year after I got there. And then I worked at Kalispell Art Casting up there and learned how to do all the stages of casting. Every time there was a chance to stay late, and if they needed someone to stay late and work on pieces for the next day, I'd stay late. I wanted to learn as much as I could. And the one thing that I fell in love with when I was 13 going to the Cowboy Hall was James Fraser's pieces of the End of the Trail and his Seated Lincoln. It's a twice life-size figure. And anyway, I always thought in the back of my head, I'd love to be able to do monuments one day. And so after learning I worked in Montana for 3 years and learned the entire process of casting. And I then headed down to Santa Fe and ran their enlarging studio down there for 7 years and did 120 enlargements in 7 years for Shadoni Foundry. And I did work for Alan Hauser and Glenn Goodacre and various different artists. Neil Estern almost had me do the FDR for the FDR Memorial, but they ran out of money some way and had to be delayed for, I think it was 8 years before they got enough money back to do the project. And by that time I was already gone. But my first studio I had a great studio downtown Santa Fe, about a block from the plaza, and started doing all my monuments there. And that was really the start of pushing it through. The Chisholm Trail piece that you saw earlier was one of the first big pieces that I did. And I did a couple of 9-footers and I guess a twice life-size figure for the University of Oklahoma. Got to know David Boren, Senator Boren at the time. And then when he became president of the university, he asked me to come back to Oklahoma and reestablish the figurative sculpture program at OU. And so sorry about that.
That's probably someone whose question I'm not asking.
Probably. So anyway, I came here and reestablished the figurative sculpture program, which had been non-existent since 1969, and taught my last class a couple weeks ago. I have one more year at the university, but they wanted me to spend a year just doing some projects for them before I totally retire. So they've got me lined up on 4, possibly 6 pieces to do for them
Wow.
in the last year, which aren't that big of pieces as for some of their niches, you know, around on their classical buildings. But anyway, it's been busy. You know, I've been, as Michelle said, I've been, you know, I've done, I think I'm on my 58th commission, and one of them's a land run, which is 45 life and a half pieces. So, you know, I've been extremely busy pushing work through, and it's been just nonstop.
So, Paul, before I let you wrap up, we do have a few more questions, if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Yeah, no problem.
Nancy is asking, do you use live models?
Very, very rarely. The Pueblo Revolt, I had my oldest son who had a huge beard. I had him pose for me, but that was just to take a couple of shots to get the movement of his neck right. And then I changed and adapted it the way I wanted it to be. He had a little bit more weight on him than what I wanted. But normally I can do a figure just out of my head and put it just about anything together. I was so poor I couldn't afford models, so I just taught myself anatomy, and you know, and by teaching yourself anatomy and practicing doing that, the only time I ever use a model is really to see what the skin does at a different movement. You know, just see the pool or, you know, the folds or whatever. But I like doing my own figures and putting in the form that I want, not necessarily copying a model, because most of the time you'll never get a model exactly the way you want it, you know, want the piece to look. So I very rarely use them.
Thank you. And Joan Bugby Jackson, who you know,
Hey,
is
Joan.
from Alaska, is asking, do you and Todd do your own polymer casting?
Yes, we do our own castings. Matter of fact, the 2 pieces that I showed you of with the polymers and the altar pieces, we did 100% of it in our studio. We're able to, I mean, Todd even does tags and everything for us. You know, gilded tags. He's a pretty talented guy. He's a great photographer. He took the photos of my pieces, and you can see how talented he is. And he's sort of a jack of all trades. He does everything. He does, you know, my payroll and my taxes, and he does my photography, graphic design work. He can do anything. You give him a challenge and he can figure it out. I'm very lucky to have him in here with me. Matter of fact, he started working with me when he was 8 years old. The first piece we did together was a life-size figure of St. Francis that we did in plaster, because at the time I couldn't afford to cast a piece. So I wanted to do a life-size piece, and it was my very first life-size piece. Todd can show you. I have the original plaster still here. Todd would mix my plaster for me at the age of 8, and we were able to do that in plaster. We just took foam and carved it out, and then laid plaster on it. At the time, I was doing a lot of plaster work, sculptures for the contemporary artist Beverly Pepper. She just passed away last year. But Beverly lived over in Italy, and Toti, Italy, and we, you know, I was doing a lot of plaster work for her. So I thought, well, I can just do plaster work and do it in plaster, and then if I don't sell it for a while, it still will hold together, you know, and hopefully I can sell off of it and be able to make a, you know, at least some money off of it in the long run. And we did an edition of 6, and by the time I sold the first piece off of the plaster, we were able to reinvest that money back in, and we were able to cast out and sell out the whole thing in a matter of, I think, 1.5 years, 2 years. So it worked out extremely well for me. So anytime someone says you can't do something, figure out a way you can do it. I've been hit with so many different ways of people saying you can't do this and you can't do that, and I'm pretty stubborn. So when someone challenges me with a problem, I figure out a way to do it and to make it happen. Speaking of Joan Bugby Jackson, I did an enlargement for her when I was at Shidoni, and it's great to know that she's on there. So hi, Joan. Yeah, we go way back together. Probably, gosh, I probably did that enlargement 38 years ago, for maybe 39 years ago for Joan.
So speaking of the years passing, you alluded to an eventual retirement or winding down. And Amy is asking, do you imagine working smaller scale in the future?
Well, I am working smaller scale right now, and I'm slowing down on the commission pieces. Yes, Todd's going to say something here. What?
You say that every year.
He said, I say that every year that I'm going to slow down. But I try. I really do try. And now I'm retiring because while I was doing all of this, I was teaching also at the university for 24 years. And so I am trying to slow down. It's just that every time I cut one thing off, something else pops up. But my body is starting to force me to slow down this time. I've had 6 spinal surgeries during the making of the land run and shoulder surgery, shoulder rebuild. And matter of fact, Todd suffered just as much as I did. He had 5 back surgeries and knee surgery. So it was a rough time for us, and a lot of wear and tear. John Cisco, one time I remember going to an NSS meeting, and I was on a cane at the time after a back surgery. And he told me, he says, well, I just finished a life-size piece. I don't know why you're sore. And I told John, well, on the first 100 pieces that I did, I wasn't sore either, but I started having problems after that. And but for the last 25 years, I've been having a lot of back problems, and the surgery started about 23 years ago. So anyway, it's just it's a rough life and a wear and tear on you if you do it the way I've done it. And I'm going to try to shift into doing some painting, because it's been I used to paint 40 years ago, and I might have 2 commissions to do portraits, painting portraits coming up here soon. So that's going to be fun to do. And everyone says, well, since you haven't done a portrait in 40 years, how do you know you can do it? Well, I'm stubborn enough. If I'll figure it out and I'll make it happen. And I've done that my whole life. I taught myself how to do enlarging. I taught myself how to sculpt. I taught myself how to do engineering right out of high school, and ran an engineering telephony district in Northern California for 5 years by myself, a 3-man office. So anyway, I mean, anything I set my mind to it, I can do it. And I think that's most of art is, if you have the confidence that you can do it, you can do it. The moment it's like being an athlete. Once an athlete doesn't think he can do something, he can't do it. So, as long as you believe in yourself and you push forward, I think anyone can make it happen. And you just have to be, I'm not sure if you just have to be stubborn or what, but I'm a pretty stubborn person, and I do work hard at it, and I work until I get it right.
We're coming up on an hour, and I don't want you to lose your voice.
Okay, no problem.
I wanted to thank you, Paul, so much. It's been an honor having you share your expertise with us. And thank you, Todd. I don't know if you can flip that phone around and wave, but for your role as cameraman, we couldn't have done it without you. And also thank you everyone for your questions and for joining us. We did record this, and it will eventually be posted on our website if you want to reference it.
Can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
Thank you to the National Sculpture Society for honoring me with the Special Medal of Honor. It's very humbling to get it, and I greatly appreciate it. And to be in the category along with like artists like Daniel Chester French and James Fraser and Malvina Hoffman and Paul Manship, and so many great artists, Neil Esther and Stanley Bleifeld, it means a tremendous amount to me. I remember when Stanley was getting his Medal of Honor, and he pulled me off to the side and he said, "One day you're going to get this." And to my surprise, it actually happened. So it's very humbling, and I greatly appreciate it. So thank you very much for that.
Well, I know the board agrees with you unanimously, so.
Oh, thank you. It's a great honor.
Our warm
Thank you,
congratulations.
Okay, well, thank you guys. And if you're ever in Norman, Oklahoma, look me up. I'd love to show you the studio in person.
I think you may have a lot of people, a lot of visitors. So,
Okay, no problem. No problem.
thank
Anyway,
you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
guys
you,
take care.
everyone. Good night.